Hi there, everybody, and welcome to the Growth Execution Podcast. I'm Mal McCallion, your host here. We are obsessed and really focused in on launching your business and how you can help to make it grow. I'm delighted to be joined today by Darrell Evans of the Mindshift Academy, Business Mindshift Academy. How are you, Darrell?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Likewise, really excited about what you're doing over there. So wanted to start off. We're in the launch season of the Growth Execution Podcast, talking about people's launches. How did you come to launch the Mindshift Business Academy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Mindshift Business Academy is actually in pre-launch right now. So at the time that your listeners hear this, it might be launched, but the backstory on the Mindshift Business Academy really comes off the heels of, this is my 30th year in business. I was fortunate to start entrepreneurship at a ripe old age of 19 while I was in college and still holding down a job. So I had a few startups along the way, and things have gone well and things have not gone well at times, but I've learned some things over 30 years that I'd have to be an absolute idiot not to be able to pass back down to the next generation of entrepreneur, the transitional entrepreneur, the entrepreneur who is at that startup phase, wanting to grow from a solopreneur to that 7-figure or even 8-figure mark. And so oddly enough, I started the podcast first, called the Mindshift Podcast, so that I could begin sharing some messages from other entrepreneurs like yourself, and then also begin to mix in my thoughts and ideas and lessons that I've learned. And so the Mindshift Business Academy is kind of the next step in bringing entrepreneurs closer into the frameworks that I've learned and used over the last 30-ish years. Yeah,
wow. And look, congratulations on making it 30 years. It's a big milestone, right? And what would you say over those years is kind of the one, if there is a big lesson that stands out for you, is this the one kind of moment in time that you really kind of look back on and go, that was formative?
So many things in 30 years that I can point to as levers or triggers. But I got to say that for an entrepreneur, probably the number one thing that I can say has gotten me here through the setbacks, through the victories, through the thousands and thousands of decisions that you have to navigate as an entrepreneur, I would have to say that it has been a dedicated focus on continuing to grow as an individual leader. And so what I mean by that is you come up under enormous pressure and stress as an entrepreneur. And in many cases, some of your closest network, including spouses and significant others and immediate family members and closest friends, don't exactly know what you're going through. They think you're an entrepreneur, you're the business owner, you're the CEO or the founder, the cool title, right? But they have no idea, if they're not an entrepreneur, what it means to walk in those shoes when you're launching and growing an enterprise. And so what I've ultimately found is that sometimes my network of support was a network of one. Right? And maybe it was a network of two. It was me physically and that other voice in my head that said, maybe I should stop, maybe I should turn around, maybe I should pivot, maybe I should go back and get a job. And so I think the biggest message for me is having a dedicated focus on personal development, personal growth, and constantly reaching for groups of individuals to develop relationships with who could really resonate with this walk we call entrepreneurship.
Yeah, fantastic. And does that learning, you've made sort of groups and perhaps support networks in there, does it also take a formal kind of process as well? Do you kind of engage in online learnings? Is it through books? What are your kind of go-to educational time?
Yeah, I'm going to age myself when I say this, but Mal, when I was in my 20s, I'm in the car driving back and forth, whether it was to class or to the office or whatever the case was. And I was like using my car as a driving university. So back then it was audio tapes, whether it was a Brian Tracy, a Tony Robbins, a Les Brown, any of the number of great sales leaders. Zig Ziglar was one of my all-time favorites, all the way up through the CD world and now into the world of podcasts and videos. But the key distinction for me was I was very fortunate early on, and I think it had to do with me being an athlete growing up. I played sports from the time I was 7 through high school formally, and then I played more amateur ball. Then I coached sports for a number of years. And I think that what I resonated with was the idea that great athletes all have coaches. And so I was very fortunate to reach out and connect to people where they became quasi mentors, coaches, and then more formally, I started joining actively coaching programs and mentoring programs and masterminds, if you will, around the 2002 window, 2003 window. And I've been a part of those types of groups ever since. And they're basically on the line item of my P&L for an expense for the year. It's not optional to not be around other people that are in this walk and race to not only build something great for the marketplace, but to build something that's sustainable for their family and leaving a legacy and impacting the community. So I'm very much a big believer in masterminds and coaching, and I'm always being coached. I've had 3 coaches, here in the last decade while we've been growing this other new business. And some people are like, well, you're 30 years in business. Why do you need a coach? Because I do.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And like you say, once you put it into that line and it's a cost that is going out every month and it's non-negotiable, that is such an important, it's so important, and particularly perhaps for those starting out for the first time, or, perhaps just, relatively young into it, to have that base and that kind of trusted advisor that you can go to, I think is a really, really important part.
I think the one thing that's interesting is, as entrepreneurs, we believe in ourselves enough to figure it out. And there's a certain amount of tenacity and audaciousness that we do have to go figure it out. When I first started online, for example, which is where my last decade or so has been in the world of online marketing and scaling and growing companies online, I didn't know how to build a website back in 2008. I didn't know how to, optimize YouTube videos and do SEO and all of these other things. The reality was there is a bit of the go figure it out component that you have to make it through this game. But I also believe there's also no reason to try to go reinvent the wheel and step outside of what I call your superstar DNA, right? Every entrepreneur, every human being on this planet, regardless of business, walk of life, whatever the case is, but every one of us have a specific type of what I call superstar DNA. And DNA stands for definite natural ability, as I use it.
Love
and
that.
the faster you get into your DNA and understand what that DNA is, you'll realize exactly when you're not operating in it, because your head will start hurting. You'll feel lethargic. You will feel energy drain when you're done with that exercise. And so it's being able to quickly recognize that when you're outside of that core DNA, and of course, as I do, and when we're launching businesses, you got to be kind of all things to all people at the beginning. Yeah. But the realization of it is get back into your DNA as fast as possible, find other people, talent, and tools to help you with the rest of the process. And so that's one of the biggest lessons and learnings, I think, as it relates to that.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. If you to get people who are skilled in particular disciplines or particular areas gives you so much time back, doesn't it? And also access to things that you just can't know. No matter how much time you spend trying to learn these things and all that sort of stuff, you've got other skills and other things that you've really got to dive into. So I love that idea of DNA. If you were thinking back to when you did first start out, and perhaps that's taken us back 30 years, what do you think would be the thing that you'd tell yourself all the way back then?
It's easy. Believe in myself a little bit more. I would say, hey, Darrell, believe in yourself a little bit more. I was what I deem a wavery entrepreneur at that time. And the reason I say that is I had an idea and a vision for what I wanted to be as an entrepreneur. I knew, for whatever reason, I felt like I wanted to be an entrepreneur. At the time, though, I had a decent job while I was in college, and I was a young leader. I'd worked in the fast food restaurant industry for a company here in the States called Taco Bell. And I was promoted to a restaurant general manager at the age of 20. Wow. So I'm making a far above average salary at the age of 20 while I'm in college. And I'm also starting a business on the side. And so I think what my advice would be is, again, going back to that sort of superstar DNA, it would have been to believe in my entrepreneurial passion and skill earlier. Because truth be told, I didn't really go full time as an entrepreneur until about 8 years later, when I was around 27 or 28. I started my first little business around 19 or 20. And I just don't think I believed in myself. I didn't
Right.
think I had it. I didn't come from the right background, if you will. I didn't have the right connections. I didn't have all the bank accounts. I didn't have all the credit.
Mm.
And it was a struggle. It was a
Yeah.
struggle to manage inventory and some other things that I was dealing with at the time. But I think that would be the advice: is really trust and believe that the resources are available. But more so, believe that if the passion is in your heart, you should really lean into it and follow it. And there were plenty of signs that I should have probably jumped in full scale entrepreneurship right from the get go. But I value every bit of experience I had on that job, and I did stay there another 6 or 7 years through
Yeah.
college, and then made the full transition over.
Got it. And if there's somebody listening to this today and who's feeling in that sort of zone where they've got that urge, they recognize what they really want to be, but it's just kind of that risk is holding them back, your advice would be just go for it.
My advice is understand that there are resources available to help you succeed. And I think the biggest piece is be careful with the self-talk that we give ourselves about failure, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have failed, Mal. I've had more failures than you can imagine. As well, you've grown
Yeah.
multiple, but
Yeah.
failure is an outcome and it's not our identity.
No.
Right? I say this all the time to people I work with. Failure is an outcome. It's a score on the scoreboard. It is not who we are. And so I think there's this idea that we're going to lose some money. Well, we can always make more money, provided that we're still in the game, we're healthy, and we're still on this planet. And I just think I think entrepreneurs, and this is not just my experience now, it's coming off the heels of thousands of consultations with companies over the last decade of what my agency does. It's the self-talk of what we're afraid of, what'll actually happen if the outcome doesn't go our way. I just think that's really where a lot of this success game lives, is it's really in between our own two ears, at least in my opinion. And so my message is, if you're an early stage entrepreneur and you're young in age, right? Because you can be an early stage entrepreneur at 50, or you can be an early stage entrepreneur in your 20s. Either way, understand that the world is abundantly, it has all the abundant resources necessary to grow this thing, or you wouldn't have had the idea, right?
Yeah.
And you just have to trust in yourself, and you have to also be mindful of reaching out to find those resources. And I think that's one of the greatest, no matter what background you come from, no matter where, the resources are available to help you grow the idea. Otherwise, the idea wouldn't have come to you.
Yeah, and I really love that idea when you were talking about that, and the score. It's just a score against you, right? That's what fail is. It's just, look, you're still in the game. You're still in the game. The match is still going on. You just got to get back out there, take the restarts, and off you go.
Yeah, I went bankrupt in 2008 when the real estate market crashed in the United States. Well, crashed all the way across the world.
Really
I owned a
did.
mortgage company in the middle of that. And what
Wow.
most people don't know is that the banks and the creditors, regardless of whether you had any bad mortgages on your books or not, they were shutting down credit lines of small lenders like me. Now, what I mean by that is I was about a $200 million a year mortgage lender. That is really, really small in the grand scheme of lending, where one lender in the United States would sell off 300 million a day.
Wow.
I'm selling off 200 million a year. So
Which
I'm a
sounds
super
huge.
small. I'm small.
Yeah.
It sounds huge, but I'm small.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what they did was they chose to get rid of the small players overnight. They just started shutting our credit lines down. We didn't do anything wrong. We had two defaults in the entire 6-month window that the whole collapse started, 2 payment defaults, that is. But our credit lines were being restricted. We used to fund 80 to 100 loans a month. And all of a sudden we went on a run where we didn't fund 2 loans over 4 months. So they were just shutting our credit lines down. Needless to say, that put enormous financial pressure on both the business, my personal life, and the banks at that time. They were not interested in loan modifications or forbearances because we were early stage, because we were in the industry where consumers 2 years later were getting all of these forbearances and these modifications. Well, we were early stage. Long story short, I'm going bankrupt in 2008. Guess what? It hurt my psyche, and I did everything I could. I tried to do everything I could. Probably did it wrong. I exhausted far more capital and assets trying to save things, where I probably should have just pulled the plug a little earlier, which was, a talk for another day. But my point is, the bankruptcy was an event. Mm-hmm. It was an event. The P&L, my balance sheet said I owed this. The assets ended up here. that's just a balance sheet issue. It wasn't a reflection on me. Now I took it personal for a little bit. I'm not going to lie. I took it personal for a minute, about, 6 months. But that's the thing. We have to separate ourselves. Otherwise I wouldn't have never started another company.
Yeah.
Like if I took that event and said, that's who I was, I'd have never started the last business that we've been running successfully for 11 years.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think that resilience is a really kind of key aspect of entrepreneurship, and kind of always go back to curiosity and resilience as being kind of two of the sort of key things you really, really need. Because it's not straightforward, is it? I mean, we're sitting here right in the middle of a pandemic across the world, and that's changed a lot of people's lives, just like that as well. And there may be people out there who have lost a job or are on furlough and are sitting thinking, do you know what? Now might be the time to launch. And I think that this is, what's great to hear from your side is, that if you've got the idea and you think that this is something that the world needs, otherwise you wouldn't have had the idea, then work out how, the how's the next bit. As long as you've got that why, that you need to come out and do this, then you can work on the how and you can make it happen.
Absolutely. I think the why is critical. Like you just said, don't just start. There's a million good ideas. We all have them. We have sometimes more than we can ever execute on, but have a why. I think about the transition after that bankruptcy window of time. I had a why for why I decided to change the industry after, so we got through the bankruptcy and we were back to being successful in the industry because we just had to pivot our business model. But a year and a half later, I'm exiting the industry. Well, why would I do that? I've been in the business 12 years. So people didn't understand that when I walked away after I'd reclaimed my sort of standing on the mountaintop of being a great, people were like, well, why are you leaving? And it was a lifestyle reason. It was a personal reason. It had to do with my life goals and plans. And it just happened to be that window, it made sense to walk away at that time. Mm-hmm. And there was a why, like you just said. So you have to have a why. And when we started what we do today, and when I think about what we're doing with the Mindshift Business Academy, the why behind it is to essentially have entrepreneurs get through this digital transformation that we're going through. There's so many companies, young and old, right? I just had a meeting the other day with two 60-plus-year-old engineers who developed a phenomenal product that'll go into the manufacturing world. And they were, as they started this plan 3 years ago, intending on using trade shows and all the traditional offline things. Wow. And here they are, two 60-plus-year-old gentlemen, smart as all get out. Product's going to be a hit. They have no idea how they're going to get it to market. Wow. And so I'm a resource in that world now. So that's my why now today. How do we make sure that product that can be impactful in the industry that they're going to serve, how do we get it to market and have it do the thing that they created it to do?
Yeah, superb. And what you're talking about there is obviously very practical, kind of executable growth, which we love obviously here in Groshen. But the mind shift that comes obviously that's within the name, is that a steady progression? Do you see people moving where their outlook is from one part to another, and does it always go in the same direction, or is it different for different people?
I think Mindshift, in my definition of it, in the way I use it, is, there's the word mindset is really out there, and everyone loves to say, hey, let me have a motivational mindset, an inspirational mindset. And I love that word. I sometimes think that the difference between the two words, and this comes from my personal life, but mindset, I see it as an intention on thought. It's an intention on attitude. It's an intention on my direction. And where mind shift comes in, for me, it becomes more behavioral, meaning if for example, let's just take the two gentlemen I just talked about, two engineers. They have every intention. They've pitched, they've got venture capital folks looking at them, and their business plan that they pitched, that they got VCs involved in, has to shift. And here's the problem. Here's the issue. Everything that they've known and intended on doing because of the pandemic, like we talked about, has changed. It's shifted. And so, but the issue now is the shift requires a new level of knowledge and understanding and learning that they don't have. They don't have the capability because it's not their world. That's not the world they grew up in. But I really think of it as between intention and behavior. Let me tell you a personal story that made Mindshift really come to life for me back in 1998. Now, I didn't use the word back in 1998, but in 1998, I had a breakup. I had two children with a relationship that we'd been in for 8.5 years. We split. And she chose, which she had every right to do. She chose to move to a state that is 1,075 miles away from where I live and where we were living at the time.
Wow.
And now I'm a father of two, and instantly I'm now a father who does not have access to his children, but across state lines and through all of the dynamics there, I started telling myself that I can't be a good father if I don't live close to them. So I moved over there. And then I realized that was really like the most horrible decision, because I was moving for the absolute wrong reason, although it seemed like the right intention.
Yeah.
So when I moved back a year later to my city here in Las Vegas, I still now have to I have to have a new way of thinking. I have to shift my thoughts on being a great father from a distance. Now the kids are 7 and 8 and 2 at that time.
Right.
Wow. What do I have to do now to be present when, by the way, cell phones were out, of course, but you really weren't using cell phones, and there certainly wasn't FaceTime and all.
Yeah. Listen, I remember those days too.
So I had to work my way through this idea of, now, how do I go back to the marketplace where I'm in business, because I was in business, but I still want to be the best dad I can be given the circumstances. And that was really the birth of Mindshift. It had nothing to do with business. It had nothing to do with motivation. It had nothing to do with inspiration. It had to do with me figuring out how I was going to behave differently as a dad, 1,075 miles away from my kids. And that really was the birthing of Mindshift. And I didn't call it that at the time, but as I reflected on when this sort of came up. But back to entrepreneurship is, as it relates to Mindshift, is when we're not getting the result we want, or we're not seeing a clear path with what we know. It's about shifting our thoughts and our attitude and our behaviors to something that maybe we don't know. But of course, that's where you get mentorship, coaching, guidance on the breakthrough that's necessary. And you hear me talk about on my show, the going from inspiration to realization, or from breakdown to breakthrough. And in my case, the birthing of Mindshift came from the breakdown moment of that relationship into a breakthrough of wanting to become and remain a great father to those boys. Now, our family has expanded since then, but that was really the birth of it. And it came with new learning across, state lines and communication and airplane flights, and being committed to pay for the necessary resources. And that also helped me stay an entrepreneur, because there would have been no job that would have let me travel back and forth as much as I did. There's no job that would have let me do that. So,
you created your own reality around the necessity of where you put your brain. And I really love that. I think that's so powerful, because sometimes we are faced with things that others have done, or events that have happened that seem so unfair and so outrageous, whether it's another person or whether it's just events. But actually, if you can, as you say, mind shift, or change your view, look around it the other way, go and poke under it, and you can see it differently and try and approach it from a different place.
It's really interesting on that last little personal point. Every one of us goes through the part that could be the negative side of the self-talk. So when she first moved, I blamed her. Like, how dare you? How dare you do this and take my kids from me, right? I went through that for a minute, and then it became then I got mature about it, and I said, she has every right as an adult to live anywhere on the planet she wants. I don't have to like it. She's an adult. She can do whatever she wants, right? And once I accepted that, then I'm like, okay, now I'm not trying to control her thinking and her thoughts and her behavior, which is what happens in sometimes, relational situations, even in business situations, with business partners or customers or clients. When I figured that out and said, okay, now I have to make peace. This is part of what I call the Mindshift method. I have to make peace with the circumstances. It doesn't mean I have to like them, but I have to make peace with them. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to get through this. Number two, I've got to make a decision about how I'm going to move forward. I've got to come up with a plan, step 3, of what is it going to look like to be a good dad when they're 8 and 2, and still make sure that that I stay where I want to be in that relationship. And then the last piece is step 4 in the Mindshift method, which is control the controllable. Like, don't worry about what you can't control. And so those are the four, again, probably birthed at that time is that method. And I've used that method for everything, not just my personal life, but for business, for sales, for marketing, other areas of my life. I have found that as simple as that sounds, make peace, make a decision, make a plan, and control the controllable.
Yeah, look, I love it. And I think that I genuinely think, particularly that last one as well, around controlling the controllables. I think there is so much emotional energy that you can end up spending on things that you just can't change. And that is so difficult to get out of once you start digging that hole. That I think it's a really, really valuable lesson. And thank you for sharing that with us, in terms of how that's all come to pass. And obviously you've used that as the kind of core underpinning for your business, right? From then on, as well as you say, in various other spheres. Are there any kind of areas of business that you've found to be more of a challenge for you than others, that you have felt that are worth kind of highlighting, that others can kind of learn from? Or have you kind of always outsourced anything that's not directly in your wheelhouse?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Business is tough. I mean, I think number one, if you work and have to hire and grow teams, human beings are such an amazing species and such a complex species. to get a bunch of us together for a common cause, who all have their own superstar DNA, who all have their own unique thoughts and talents and gifts. And so I think the absolute hardest thing I've done as an entrepreneur in any business that I've been involved in, and I see it in the companies that I advise or coach, and it is the people. It is the people. It's building superstar teams. And it doesn't mean just getting people that are super talented. It's easy to find super talented people. It's getting those talented folks to work together and collaborate. And you hear it probably as well as I do. You've got marketing department over here and you got sales over here, and there's no alignment, right? You've got operational friction going across the aisles. And so I just think people is the big one. And so, as an entrepreneur, I have kind of a vision of what I think entrepreneurs really have three jobs. They have to create a product or service that will serve the marketplace, right? Serve their customer. Number two, they've got to create an environment that supports and serves their team, their employees, their staff, right? And then they've got a third obligation to support themselves as founders, as owners, right? The business has to support all three of those. Don't just build something great and take it to market to serve the customers and then have terrible relations with your staff, or you're putting too much on your staff for the sake of the marketplace. And then at the same time, you got to be careful in balancing your needs as an entrepreneur, because the business should serve you also. But no question, hiring great people, keeping great people on, keeping them motivated, keeping them collaborating together, keeping dialogue open, intermixing nuances with personalities, the hardest thing about growing a business, in my opinion.
Do you know what? I couldn't agree more. And I think you're absolutely right. It's that to be able to kind of wrangle them into a kind of a common vision is really the key to that, right? And part of that comes from recruitment. You need to get people who share your vision. And one of the things I see a lot is people hiring people for functions and just going, right, we need a salesperson, let's go get a salesperson. And it's somebody who may have been amazing at selling in one particular environment, but they come over here and they don't share the values and they don't really commit. And then it just falls apart. So I think you're absolutely right that those relations with the human beings that are in your business are so important, and they need to be taken care of with, in my view, an aligned purpose, because that's what really brings people together.
I think one thing entrepreneurs can do at the beginning is decide what your culture is going to look like. And I don't want to get into this big old, designing this whole culture ideology, but what you have to do as an entrepreneur is decide who is not acceptable to work in your company, regardless of their skill set. What attitudes, what personalities, what type of human. For example, one of the interview strategies I have when I'm interviewing, and I still do almost all the hiring in my company because it's that important to me. And this may sound silly. It won't show up in any recruiting playbook or hiring playbook you probably will ever find online, but this is one of my criteria. when I have that first interview, and I won't necessarily be in all 3 interviews, but I like to have the first 15-minute interview. And the first 15-minute interview, I ask the same 5 or 6 questions to all the candidates. So if I post a job, I'm going to get, typically in a non-COVID market, I would get 50 resumes. And when COVID hit, oh my goodness, I got 200 resumes for new roles.
Wow.
But I would try to get that down to 10 to 15 people where I'm going to take them through a 15-minute, and I'm asking the same questions. Let me tell you what's really interesting about those questions. I'm only looking for a few things. I'm looking for, does this person exhibit some sort of vision for where they want to go in the future? Like, I don't want to hire anybody who just needs a check. I need to hire someone who has a bigger purpose and a bigger vision for themselves, and something in the job called out to them. So that's number 1. Number 2, I want to know, how do they handle adversity, and how have they handled it in the past? In the marketing space that I work in, things are changing on a regular basis. We have client demands. We have a lot of things going on. If this person cannot handle change on a rapid pace, I need to be able to kind of figure that out in the first. There's a couple of questions I ask about that. The third most important one for me is a question about their own self-esteem. And I ask them a question that helps me evaluate, are they a confident individual in who they are? And when I'm done with those questions, there's one other one, which I'm hoping to feel good about this last one. I don't ask this as a question, but my intent after the first interview is, could I invite this person to my house for a barbecue this Saturday? I want to know, do I feel like the energy that I just felt is appropriate to be around my family this weekend at 4 p.m. for the barbecue, right? Now, that may be the most ludicrous assessment for what an HR, but for me as a smaller company, we have small teams. My teams have usually never been beyond 25, 30, 35. That's a small team to me.
Yeah.
Part of my company culture is it's family-like-ish. And I need to feel like, I could be dead wrong, but I want to leave that first call and think, yeah, they could come to the barbecue on Saturday, whether I hire them or not.
Yeah, I'm always going to think of that as Darrell's barbecue test. Love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Sure.
I'm going to fire a quick couple of questions at you just before we get ready to go. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
It sounds cliche. But don't quit. And it's cliche, but just don't quit on yourself. Don't quit on the vision. Don't quit on your dream. Probably the way I'll better say it is this. If you find yourself at a place where things aren't going your way, you aren't reaching the goals that you want, it's okay to change the plan, but don't throw away the goal. And so that's probably a better way of saying it, meaning it's okay that the plan changes, the strategy changes, the tactic changes, but just don't throw the goal away. The goal was important for a reason, otherwise you wouldn't have been on the path. And so that's probably a better way for me to say it, but don't quit is the underlying message.
No, love that. Brilliant. So final question we ask everybody as well is, what are you doing straight after this? It's a slightly less exciting question, I think, in lockdown in general, but what's on the cards for the rest of your day?
I'm sorry, on the cards for?
On for the rest of your day. What are you up to?
Oh, so believe it or not, I'm finishing this conversation. I have 4 other meetings today. I'm on a television interview. I'm also conducting a podcast recording for the Mindshift podcast. I'm having a strategy meeting for ad campaigns. So I've got a varied afternoon. I've got some writing to do. But yeah, a typical day for me is a little bit of, it's usually speaking most of the day and then a little bit of writing.
Fantastic. And listen, Darrell, you've been a great guest. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. How can anybody listening to this find you?
Yeah, probably 2 ways to find me. You can pop over to darrellevans.net, just my name, darrellevans.net, and or find me on any social platform at Mr. Darrell Evans. Don't ask me why it's Mr., but there's someone else who's more famous than me who got there before I did.
What about speed? It's not about famousness, is it? Listen, thank you so much. Really, really great to catch up. All the very best with it, and we'll speak to you again soon. All right.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.